Celeste Fontaine was 38 years old, and for 11 years she had been the kind of woman her husband's family described, when they bothered to describe her at all, as perfectly fine considering where she came from. She drove a 12-year-old Sentra. With a slow leak in the back left tire, she patched herself with a kit from the hardware store. She clipped coupons out of habit, wore her grandmother's coat through 3 Memphis winters because it still had good years left in it, and kept her savings in a credit union account Raymond had never once asked to see. His family called her Sweet Celeste, the kind of compliment that was really just a way of making smallness sound like a virtue. On a Thursday morning in November, Raymond stood across the kitchen from her and told her, with a lawyer already standing by, that he was done. He had spent the previous 14 months quietly moving his assets, consulting privately with a financial advisor whose wife happened to play tennis with Raymond's mother, and he walked out with the house, 2 vehicles, the brokerage account she hadn't even known existed, and a settlement that left Celeste with $4,200, a suitcase, and a storage unit full of furniture nobody in his family had ever thought was worth keeping anyway. The settlement gave Raymond $340,000 in combined assets against her $4,200. What Raymond never thought to ask, not once in 11 years, was why Celeste drove to the gas station every Friday evening instead of buying groceries online like he always suggested, or why the same modest blue jacket came out every single week, rain or not, for a ritual he had decided years ago was too small to be curious about. He walked out of that courthouse, certain he had taken everything worth taking. He had no idea that 3 months later, on a Tuesday evening in February, he would be sitting in his mother's living room watching the evening news when the camera panned to a woman in a blue jacket standing at a gas station lottery terminal holding a ticket worth $750 million, and that the woman would be his ex-wife, and that the expression on her face would be the exact same calm, unbothered expression she had worn the day he left. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. 3 months before that Tuesday in February, before any of it, the morning had started the way most of Celeste's Thursdays started, early, the Memphis air still cold enough to see your breath. The kitchen already clean because she cleaned it the night before out of habit, a thermos of coffee in her hand, and a grocery list on the counter that had nothing on it she couldn't afford. Her grandmother used to say, "A woman who knows how to be still knows how to wait." And a woman who knows how to wait always ends up with more patience than the people who outran her. Ida Mae Fontaine had raised Celeste in a shotgun house in South Memphis on a postal worker's pension and a garden that fed half the block every summer. And she had died the year Celeste turned 24, without ever once, in her life, winning anything larger than a church raffle. She had played the lottery every Friday for 40 years anyway, not out of desperation, she always said, but out of what she called quiet faith in improbable things. Celeste had inherited the habit. Every Friday evening, on her way home from work, she stopped at the same Gulf station on Airways Boulevard, bought the same quick pick ticket, tucked it in the inside pocket of her grandmother's coat, and kept going. Raymond had found the whole thing mildly embarrassing. He told her once that lotteries were a tax on people who didn't understand statistics. She had simply nodded and said that her grandmother had understood plenty about waiting and nothing at all about giving up, and left it at that. She had met Raymond at a law firm mixer back when she was 26, and still impressed by the kind of man who wore a watch that cost more than her rent. He was 31, well-dressed, easy with a compliment, and had a confidence about him that she had mistaken, for a long time, for steadiness. He asked what she did. She told him she was a paralegal working toward her certification. He said, "That was admirable. in the tone of a man who finds a thing admirable precisely because he has already decided it is beneath him. He asked if she had family in Memphis. She told him a little, not much. Her grandmother mostly. The Shotgun House on the South Side. He said that was interesting and moved on to the next topic before the word had even settled. She married him 4 years later in a chapel his mother had chosen, wearing a dress his aunt had selected, in a ceremony that felt, even at the time, more like something being arranged around her than something she had built. Her grandmother had sat in the front row in her Sunday hat, back straight, saying nothing, watching Raymond's family with the particular patience of a woman who had seen plenty of things that hadn't lasted and knew better than to say so at the wrong moment. Afterward, at the reception, Raymond's mother had taken Celeste's hand and told her she was just lovely, such a sweet addition. Ida May, standing nearby, had simply smiled and said nothing. On the drive home, she told Celeste that the people who called you an addition to someone else's family had usually never considered the possibility that the math might run the other way. The first clear sign of trouble had not come from anything dramatic. It came the same way most things in her marriage came, quietly and from the side. A financial statement she'd asked Raymond to share for their joint tax filing that he'd said he'd forwarded, but hadn't. A dinner canceled, with an explanation that didn't quite line up with the calendar she could still see on the shared account. A conversation overheard between Raymond and his brother at Thanksgiving, low, but not low enough, about restructuring some things before the new year, in a tone that had nothing to do with taxes. That was the evening she started paying a different kind of attention. She pulled the shared tax file from 2 years prior. She cross-referenced the brokerage statements against the joint return, the way she had been trained to cross-reference discovery documents at the firm, line by line, nothing assumed. The brokerage account Raymond's attorney would eventually claim in the settlement had contributions going back 4 years, drawn from a checking account she had never been added to, opened 11 months after their wedding. He had not hidden it badly. He had simply assumed she would never look. You didn't need to be a certified paralegal to recognize the shape of a filing designed to make one party's assets invisible to the other. She had been reviewing discovery documents for 11 years. She knew exactly what deliberate omission looked like in a financial record, and this one was so ordinary, she almost admired its confidence. 3 months before the divorce was finalized, Celeste sat in the parking lot of the Gulf Station on a Friday evening and scratched a lottery ticket while the quick pick printed behind her, the same way she had every Friday since she was old enough to do it herself. The quick pick ticket went into the inside pocket of the coat. The scratched ticket, $4, went into the cup holder. She drove home. She was watching. She had been watching the particular shape of Raymond's carelessness for months, the same patient attention she'd learned sitting beside her grandmother in the garden, waiting for something to show itself before you moved. Then came the November Thursday. The lawyer. The kitchen, the settlement that left her with $4,200 and a storage unit. She did not argue with Raymond in that kitchen. She did not raise her voice. She listened to his attorney explain the terms, signed where she was told to sign, and thanked everyone for their time the way her grandmother had once taught her to thank the people who were rude to you, because leaving a room better than you found it was its own kind of dignity. That evening, in the small furnished room she'd rented 2 weeks before the papers were signed because she'd known, in the quiet way she knew things, that she would need it, she sat on the edge of the bed and called her grandmother's oldest friend, Miss Evelyn, a woman who had known Ida May Fontaine since they were both in pigtails, and who had also known, from the moment she met Raymond at that wedding, that he was exactly the kind of man who only knew the value of something after he had already let it go. He took everything? Miss Evelyn said. Everything he could see, Celeste said. Miss Evelyn was quiet a moment. "That's always been his problem," she said. "He only ever looked at the surface of things." That weekend, Celeste drove out to the cemetery to put fresh flowers on her grandmother's grave, the same yellow chrysanthemums Ida May had always kept on the kitchen table, because she said yellow was the color of things that weren't finished yet. She didn't say much. She stood in the cold for a while, hands in the pockets of the blue coat, and thought about patience and improbable things, and what it meant to keep a habit long enough for it to finally mean something. 12 days after the divorce was finalized, on a Friday evening in February, Celeste stopped at the Gulf Station on Airways Boulevard, bought her quick pick ticket, tucked it into the inside pocket of her grandmother's coat, and drove home to the furnished room. She checked the numbers on her phone just after 9. Her hands didn't shake. She checked them again, once, the way she had learned to check everything twice before she trusted it. And then she sat very still on the edge of the bed in the furnished room for approximately 4 minutes. The same 4 minutes her grandfather had once told her to give yourself after anything that changes the whole shape of the future. Then she picked up her phone and called the one person she knew would help her handle the rest of this exactly right. The attorney's name was Francesca Odom, a woman who specialized in sudden financial events and who had, according to the tax attorney Miss Evelyn had recommended, handled 3 previous major lottery wins with the kind of discretion that meant almost none of them had ever made local news. Celeste sat across from her the following Monday morning and explained the situation plainly, start to finish, including the divorce, the settlement, and the fact that Raymond's attorney had made a point, in the settlement paperwork, of specifying that any future financial gains from individual accounts or personal activities post-divorce were solely Celeste's and not subject to revisitation. Francesca read that clause twice. She set the paper down. "He actually put that in writing," Francesca said. "It was not a question. His attorney thought it protected Raymond," Celeste said, "in case my certification ever led anywhere he'd have to share in." "It protects you instead," Francesca said. "Completely, he handed you a legal wall and walked away thinking it was a fence." Francesca's line landed simply. Some documents protect the person who wrote them, and some protect the person who survived them. They agreed on a plan. The prize would be claimed through a trust, the way all large prizes should be claimed, structured and named and handled quietly, before a single camera was pointed at anything. The Lottery Commission required a public claim, a formality that Francesca arranged to be as brief and controlled as possible. A brief statement, a photograph, no extended press availability, nothing that would linger longer than necessary. The trust had actually been partially in place already, a small vehicle Francesca had helped Celeste structure 2 years earlier to hold a minor inheritance from her grandmother's estate. Just the shotgun house and a small savings account. Because a paralegal who reviewed estate documents for a living knew the value of having a structure ready before you needed it, rather than scrambling to build one after the fact. Expanding it to accommodate a lottery prize was, Francesca said, the most elegant coincidence she had seen in 20 years of practice. "Your grandmother's house is already in the trust," Francesca said. "So technically, Ida May's name was on this before you ever bought the ticket." Celeste sat with that for a moment. She'd have something to say about that, she finally said. "I'm sure she would," Francesca agreed. Whatever it was, it would probably be right. In this story, there was no courtroom to return to, no table to sit across from Raymond at. The settlement had already been signed, the clause was already ironclad, the wall was already built, by his own attorney's hand, and it was holding exactly as well as good walls do. What there was instead was a Tuesday evening at a gas station terminal, Celeste in her grandmother's coat, checking a ticket she had bought out of a 40-year habit she had never once apologized for, while a local news camera meant to cover the Lottery Commission's weekly winner recap caught the whole thing in real time. She did not perform for the camera. She did not raise her arms or scream or cry. She looked at the screen for a long moment, checked the numbers a second time on her phone, and then looked up at the young reporter who had appeared at her elbow with a microphone and said quietly that yes, she had bought the ticket that morning, and yes, she had played every Friday for 11 years, and yes, she intended to honor the tradition her grandmother had started long before her. She smiled once, small and genuine, and then she called Francesca. That footage, 48 seconds long, ran on 3 local stations by midnight and was shared widely enough that Raymond's mother saw it in her living room, and Raymond saw it over his mother's shoulder, and his attorney saw it the following morning and called Francesca's office to, in his words, just open a dialogue. Francesca had returned that call in exactly 3 sentences. The settlement was final. The clause was clear. There was no dialogue to open. She did not tell Celeste about the call for 2 weeks, and when she did, she delivered it the way a person delivers news that is no longer dangerous, simply and without ceremony, because that was what it had become. That weekend, Celeste drove out to visit Miss Evelyn, who had already seen the news segment twice by the time she arrived and was sitting on her porch in the February cold because she said she needed the air after the shock of it. Celeste sat beside her, and they didn't talk about the money much at all. They talked about Ida May instead, about the garden and the church raffle and 40 years of Friday tickets, and the way her grandmother had always said that patience wasn't just a virtue, it was a strategy. She would have loved this, Miss Evelyn said. I know, Celeste said. I thought about her the whole drive to the terminal. What are you going to do with it? Miss Evelyn asked. Same thing she would have done, Celeste said. Share most of it quietly, keep enough to never need anybody's permission again, and not make a single large decision for at least a year. Miss Evelyn was quiet a moment. Raymond's mother called me, she finally said, 2 days after the segment aired. Said she was reaching out to reconnect, said she'd always thought of me as family. What did you tell her? I told her I'd call her when I found the time, Miss Evelyn said, and did not say anything else about it. Real wealth, Celeste had learned watching her grandmother manage a postal pension and a garden for 40 years, was not about what you had. It was about never needing to perform it for anyone. Back in Francesca's office the following week, an accountant named Theodore, who had spent 30 years managing inherited and sudden wealth for clients who needed someone steady enough to think clearly when they could not, walked Celeste through the full picture. After taxes on the lump sum, the trust held $312 million. Francesca's contract clause from Raymond's own attorney meant that every dollar was entirely and irrevocably Celeste's. Theodore had pulled the original settlement documents himself and read the relevant language 3 times before he allowed himself to speak. His attorney handed you an iron wall, Theodore said, and labeled it a fence so Raymond would feel like he'd won something. He thought it would keep me from making a claim on his future bonuses, Celeste said. He told me once he expected to be making 7 figures by 40. Is he? No, Celeste said simply. Theodore also flagged something else. Nearly as an afterthought, Raymond's divorce settlement had apparently been structured in part around a deferred compensation agreement he had with his firm. One that was now, according to public filings, under review by his firm's ethics board following an unrelated internal audit. The review had nothing to do with Celeste. It had everything to do with the kind of man who moved assets quietly while his wife was still in the same house, and the kind of paper trail that kind of movement tends to leave behind. Not your problem, Theodore said. No, Celeste agreed. It really isn't. The call from Raymond came 8 days after the news segment. She let it go to voicemail. His voice on the message was carefully modulated. Not desperate, not apologetic, just composed. The way he sounded when he was working up to something he had already rehearsed. He congratulated her. He said he had been thinking about their years together, that he felt the two of them had never quite had the conversation they actually deserved. He said he had no expectations. He just thought it would be worth a coffee whenever she had the time just to talk. There were 3 more sentences after that. She did not listen to them. She deleted the message and went inside to sign the trust documents instead. Later that week his mother called, and then his brother, and then a cousin she hadn't heard from since the wedding, each one with their own version of the same careful warmth. Each one stopped at voicemail. Each one deleted without reply. She had no interest in becoming the kind of woman who needed to explain herself to people who had only recently found her worth explaining things to. 14 months later, the Shotgun House in South Memphis where Ida Mae Fontaine had raised Celeste and fed half the block belonged, quietly, to a foundation in her grandmother's name. The foundation had renovated 12 homes in the surrounding 4 blocks, endowed a garden program at the neighborhood elementary school, and established a college scholarship fund for girls from South Memphis that had already sent 3 of them to universities their families had not dared apply to before. The foundation's name appeared on a small brass plaque on the corner of the building that had once been the neighborhood's empty lot. Now, a community garden. The Ida Mae Fontaine Center for Growing Things. Celeste had bought herself a house with a real garden and a kitchen, with enough counter space to finally cook the way her grandmother had taught her, and she had done it alone, paying cash, with no one else's signature on the deed. She had kept the blue coat. She still wore it on Fridays. She had started seeing someone the previous spring, unhurried, the way she did most things. His name was Gabriel, a landscape architect she'd met through the foundation's garden program. A quiet, deliberate man who had come recommended by Theodore's wife, and who had arrived for their first meeting with a hand-drawn sketch of what the garden behind the foundation's first renovated house could look like if they gave it a full season to establish itself. He never asked about the money directly. He asked about the garden. He asked about her grandmother. He asked what Ida Mae had grown. Celeste had ended up talking for nearly an hour, and Gabriel had listened to all of it, taking occasional notes in a small notebook. And when she finally stopped, he had said simply that the garden was going to be extraordinary, and that it would probably smell like something she remembered from childhood by the second summer. She had not been wrong about him. Raymond's ethics review had not concluded favorably. 2 clients had filed formal complaints in its wake, and the firm had quietly separated from him by summer. He had, according to Miss Evelyn's nephew who worked downtown, taken a position with a smaller firm in a city 2 states away, a step down in every visible direction, the kind of fall that happens slowly enough that the person falling can almost convince themselves it is a controlled descent. Raymond's mother had called Miss Evelyn twice more after that first call. Miss Evelyn had, eventually, found the time to call her back, and had kept the conversation brief and gracious, and had never once mentioned Celeste's name. Celeste heard about most of it secondhand, the way she heard weather reports for places she no longer lived. She registered it. She did not linger on it. That evening, out in the new garden with Gabriel, pressing the last of the spring seedlings into soil that had already had 1 full season to settle, she thought about her grandmother's line. The one about a woman who knows how to wait, always ending up with more patience than the people who outran her. She was free. She was solvent. She had kept the habit her grandmother gave her for 11 years without ever once telling a single person why it mattered so much, and the habit had finally answered back. Some things, she thought, watching Gabriel kneel in the dirt beside her without being asked, were worth the full 40 years of waiting to become what they were always supposed to be. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out two more for you that I think you'll really like.